Hi, everybody. My name is Lillian Ruiz, and I am the instructor for English 221 Shakespeare. And as you know, we had a snow day during the first day of the semester, but I have accounted for that in our course outline, which I will talk about shortly. So, what basically I wanted to do today is to give you an overview of what the class is going to be about, and then we can begin in earnest next week. So if you are able to log on to Moodle, and I'm assuming so because you are watching this video, you will see that at the top of the Moodle page there is a general section. And in that general section, you have several icons, and that's how you navigate the course. So I'm going to go through those icons, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time with the syllabus and course outline, which I uploaded into the first icon that's entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. So that's basically where you could find any of the documents that I would be giving in hard copy form if we were meeting in a face-to-face class. Right now, what you've got in there is the syllabus, which I will be reviewing shortly, as well as the course outline, which I will be reviewing shortly. And I will add other documents as the semester progresses. Underneath that, you will see past class sessions. So basically, what I'm trying to do in this class and all my online classes is to duplicate as much as possible what you might experience in a face-to-face class. So what I'm going to be doing is posting videos, much like this one, twice a week, much like we would be meeting in a face-to-face situation twice a week. And what you would have is 48 hours to watch that particular video and to answer a corresponding question for that video, which I count as attendance. And each week, what I will do is retire the previous week into the folder that's entitled Past Class Sessions. So, what will be visible to you on our Google homepage is the actual week that we are working on. But you can access the entire semester by going into the Past Class Sessions folder. Underneath that, you will see that I've got a discussion forum folder. That's where you will be posting your answers for the attendance questions that I will be posting at the ending of each video. And you will soon find out that the questions I like to ask are opinion based. I really want to focus on thinking and learning, not necessarily on just regurgitation of factual content. So, that said, the responses are not evaluated outside of whether or not you have or have not given a response, and that would count as your attendance for the day. You can almost think of it like raising your hands in class and answering a question in class, which I will talk about a little bit more. And then I've got two optional elements. One is called an optional chat. So if you ever wanted to run a chat with your classmates or with me, you could do that through that icon. And the other is called an optional Zoom. So if you ever wanted a Zoom meeting with me, that gives you my Zoom information. And what you will see on the homepage now is today, which is our introduction. And what you will have is a video, and beneath each of the videos that I post over the course of the semester is you will have the class notes. Basically, those are the actual notes that I use when I am teaching. These are the pieces of information that I would write, let's say, on a whiteboard if we were in a face-to-face situation. And what I'm going to do now is to review the document entitled Syllabus, which you can find in your Syllabus and Other Documents folder. I always recommend that you take a hard copy so that you can easily access it over the course of the semester. I've got the hard copy right in front of me, right here, as you can see. And this is where you would find your typical syllabus information about a course. You will have the name of the class. You will have the mode of delivery, which for us is online, Moodle. You'll have the name of the instructor, which is Lillian Ruiz. And most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, but feel free to call me whatever you feel comfortable with. My office phone, and that will get you to North 328A, which is where my office is located in the Inclusion Diversity Center. If you haven't had an opportunity to visit, I encourage you to do so. There are areas where students can study, where they can socialize. There's a little kitchenette. It's basically a tiny suite, and my office is in there as well. And anybody who supports inclusion and diversity is welcome. And my office hours, which may or may not be helpful to you being an online student, are Mondays through Thursdays from 9 to 10 a.m., which means that I should be in my office if I'm not at a meeting during those times. So you can just drop in, or you can always make an appointment with me if you so wanted to. So, the textbooks for this class, the good news about Shakespeare is that Shakespeare is indeed in the public domain and that there are many versions of Shakespearean texts available. So, what I ordered for class is the Complete Pelican Shakespeare, which is a review, I think, of not only all of Shakespeare's works, but some scholarship associated with Shakespeare as well. And the price, I think, is fairly affordable considering what you're going to be getting. Now, the Pelican Shakespeare includes all kinds of Shakespeare plays that we would not be reading in the class. We're not reading all of his plays. So, certainly, you can read the plays individually and buy individual copies. Again, Pelican is a very reputable name because their footnotes are excellent. But any Shakespearean edition with good footnotes. One of the things we'll talk about is how Shakespeare is accessible online. Lots of places you can do that, but if you wanted to get to the pinnacle of Shakespeare studies in the United States, that would be the Folger Shakespeare Library, which has all of the plays. And I will be sharing that information with you next class. And Shakespeare plays, which we will soon discuss, are divided into acts, scenes, and lines, which means that when we are referencing something from the play, we don't have to rely on a page number the way we normally would if we were talking about, let's say, a novel. So we would talk about the act, the scene, and the line in which the action occurs or the quote happens to appear, which means that it doesn't matter which edition you're using of Shakespeare because we can all find the same act, scene, and line fairly quickly. We don't have to rely on the page numbers. Now, my favorite Shakespeare anthology is The Riverside Shakespeare. It's what I used when I was an undergraduate student. Alas, it's no longer in print, though I know you can find used copies of it online. So that one is my favorite. But the Pelican or the Complete Pelican Shakespeare is a good second choice. But again, whatever edition that you find, or perhaps you already own, I do recommend footnotes, however, because Renaissance language can be tricky, as we will discuss, and having the footnotes can be very helpful to helping you be able to sort out some of the language. And I've got to note that it's assumed you'll have a good dictionary at the source. Not that I expect you to go out and buy one. Yes, I'm aware you probably have the electronic options for a dictionary at the source. But having it and using it can be two different things. And yes, we will be doing writing in class, and both of these are excellent resources. Thesaurus in particular because you can get synonyms, words that are similar in meaning, and sometimes also antonyms, words that are opposite in meaning. So this can be very helpful in terms of your writing. The course description from the catalog is that this course is a critical study of a selected group of plays by Shakespeare. He wrote quite a few plays. We won't be reading them all, and soon I'll be talking about which ones we will be reading. And the course also gives some attention to contemporary presentations or adaptations. Ultimately, Shakespeare's plays were meant to be performed, which means that we will be watching performances in class. It would be ideal if we could see a live performance, but unfortunately, logistically, that's too difficult. But I will be sharing different kinds of performances with you through the internet over the course of the semester so that we can talk a little bit about performance as well as actually talking about the texts themselves. And there is a prerequisite for this class. It's what we at GCC call Comp 2, which is an introduction to literature class, which for us at GCC would mean three options: either English 112, which is Introduction to Literature, English 114, which is a creative writing class, or Literature 116. And what that is literature and film. So any of these English classes, English 112, 114, or 116, or their equivalent, would satisfy that requirement. So if you think you haven't satisfied that requirement, please let me know. And we'll talk about what options make the most sense for you. And for learning outcomes, hopefully what happens by the ending of the semester is that you can appreciate Shakespearean drama as enjoyable. Yes, enjoyable. Significant and relevant. The plays really do talk about timeless and universal themes. And remember that Shakespeare really was a television of his day. His audiences would go for entertainment. And I know that oftentimes Shakespeare can seem rather daunting. But once you can get past the language, you can see that there is a lot that is entertaining about the plays that will examine the various kinds of Shakespearean drama. He wrote in different categories, or what we call genres. He wrote comedies. And this is how we'll begin the semester. He wrote histories. We'll read some of those, actually, one of those. He wrote tragedies, probably what he's best known for. We'll read some of those. And also tragic comedies. So we'll talk about those and when they were written and what elements compose each of those genres. We'll learn how to read and understand Renaissance English, which you can think of almost like another language, but one that you know perhaps 90% of. Keep in mind that ultimately Shakespeare was writing for his audience, not necessarily for 2026. But with practice, what you will find is that you'll pick up a lot of the language. And I have students tell me that every semester. They'll ask me if the plays are getting easier by the ending of the semester. And actually, they're not. They're getting more difficult, but it's becoming easier for students to read the Renaissance language. So that's why the plays feel easier. We'll identify some of the major themes and issues that can be found in the dramas. We'll recognize the relationship between Shakespeare's plays and our present day world, that really very little has changed. Certainly, things like fashion and language have changed, but universals like love and jealousy, those remain timeless. And hopefully improve written and communication skills by the act of reading and the act of writing. The more you do it, the more you can improve. So, this class offers a general introduction to the content and techniques of Shakespearean drama, but we'll also read a few of his poems, which are known as sonnets, which we will talk about. We'll study some representative sonnets, comedies, histories, tragedies, and tragic comedies. The course emphasizes critical thinking, critical reading, critical writing, a lot of critical in there. And basically, what that's about is asking questions, interpreting, analyzing, asking why, actually, which is what toddlers tend to do very well. So perhaps what we need to do is not learn something new, but go back to the very beginnings when we were filled with curiosity and we wanted to know why. I've oftentimes said that's the difference between high school and college. High school is about what, and college is trying to determine the why. And hopefully we can see the aesthetic and literary merits of Shakespeare's works. So, procedures, how to do this in an online class. So, again, what I try to do in my online classes is to duplicate as much as possible what would happen in a face to face class. So, if we were meeting in a face to face class, we would meet Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. So, hearing that, you might be grateful that we are meeting in an online situation. What this means is that every Monday and every Wednesday by 8 a.m., you should have a video like this one from me that will basically cover the material I would normally cover in a face-to-face class. If we hadn't had the snow day, this video would have been posted on Monday, but we did have the snow day, so this video will be posted by Wednesday. In fact, what I'm going to do is to try to post the videos the night beforehand. And just because we are indeed having classes on Tuesday, albeit they are starting at 10 a.m., I am going to be posting this by Tuesday at 10 a.m. so that you've got lots of time to view it. Basically, this would be the class for the Wednesday if we were meeting Monday and Wednesday at 8 a.m. And I think this will make a little bit more sense when I go through the course outline. You will have 48 hours to watch that video and to answer the corresponding attendance question that's attached to that video in our class discussion forum. Now, if it turns out that you need more time outside of 48 hours, just ask me for an extension. I'll be happy to grant it to you. But the idea is that basically you are responding so that your classmates can read your responses. And that would basically duplicate, in many respects, what you would experience in a class discussion. Now, you're certainly encouraged to respond to your classmates, much like you would in a face-to-face situation, but you're not required to. Much like, again, you're not required to raise your hand in a face-to-face situation. But what you are going to be required to do is to read your classmates' responses and my responses in turn, because I will be responding to each of you. And I'm well aware that some students learn best by participating, but other students learn best by listening. So basically, you can decide how much or how little to participate, so to speak, in the discussion forum. But do read all of the discussion forum responses and my responses in turn. And then any of the written assignments that you would normally hand in, papers, for instance, in a final examination, which we will discuss in a little bit more depth in the next few minutes and then also over the course of the semester, you would be submitting that to me electronically. My grading program works best through my email, so I'm going to ask you to send that electronically through my to my email address, which is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. No first initial, just my surname, Ruiz. The reason why is because when I started teaching at GCC, we had not yet instituted an email program. So I've been at GCC for quite a while. 1993 is when I began. And we quickly learned once we began using email that the surname would not be sufficient, that we should really add a first initial so that there wouldn't be that much duplication. But if you see somebody with just a surname using for their email address, they are basically indicating that they were at GCC for the very beginnings of the email evolution and revolution. So again, my email would be Ruiz, just my surname, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. And that's where you will send your papers and your final exam. And I ask that you send that via PDF because that's how my grading program works. And I ask that you also use your GCC email address rather than a private address when you are sending information. Now, I know Moodle has a grading program. I do not use the grading program in Moodle, but if you ever want to know what your grades are, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to let you know. And soon I will go through what the grading components are for the class because basically you can keep track of this yourself. So course requirements, you're expected to do all of the reading, all of the writing assignments by the due date. You're expected to watch all of these videos in their entirety and to respond to the class attendance question. There will be 2 out-of-class papers that will be assigned over the course of the semester. One will be approximately halfway through the semester, so we've got a little bit of time to talk about it. And the other will be due towards the ending of the semester. And then at the very ending of the semester, there will be a final examination. And the final exam is open book, open notes. So it's not a question of memorization, it's a question of synthesizing. And I can tell you right now how to prepare for the final examination. Watch all these class videos. Basically, one way or another, these videos will be addressing that final exam. Read all of the plays and read all of the discussion forum responses. If you do that, you'll be in very good shape for the final examination. And if you have any special learning needs, please talk with me as soon as possible to discuss the assistance that would be helpful to you. That final that I was referencing will be an essay exam where I'll give you several options from which to choose. And the two papers that I was discussing, which are due via PDF on the day specified or by the day specified to my email, basically are going to be critical papers, which means you do not need to do any outside research. And they will be based on the readings of the texts that we're doing in class. And the first paper, which will be due again by approximately the midpoint of the semester, I will give you some sample paper topics from which to choose, or you can create your own paper topic based on one of the readings that we're doing in class. As long as you get that paper topic approved by me, then you can proceed and respond to that. The papers would be approximately 4 to 5 pages long, but basically as long or short as necessary for you to support your particular thesis. And that first paper, I view it as a learning exercise. So all of you would have the opportunity to rewrite your first paper after I've evaluated it and returned it back to you. And you can rewrite it for a higher grade. The first grade would disappear. I would see it again as a learning exercise. So you could do a revision based on my feedback, and I ask that you submit in the original paper with my commentary along with the revision. And you would have up until the ending of the semester to do that. So the second paper is due towards the ending of the semester and basically apply the comments and the learning from the first paper into the second paper. So the second paper is basically the same kind of exercise, the same length, the same possibilities for topics, but the difference would be that you would be writing about a different text. And then the final exam would be cumulative, and it could be based on any of the texts that we've discussed over the course of the semester. But again, you would have choice. And I realize this is a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember it all, but I wanted to give you an overview of what a semester, our semester, will look like. And there is an institutional services disability statement that I wanted to read to you on the syllabus that we value inclusion and equal access to our programs and activities at Greenfield Community College. And we're committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are any aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please let me know as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need an academic accommodation, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And their contact information is in the syllabus. And I'm just going through the major portions of the syllabus. I'm at the attendance and discussion forum section, where class activity and discussion in the discussion forum is extremely important and can't be made up. So absences and tardiness can be reflected in your participation grade. There is a participation grade, which I will talk about. While each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade, or 2 times that you don't respond to the discussion form. Excessive absences could even result in failure if you miss too many of the discussion forms. So, if it turns out that you need an extension for the discussion form response because you can't make a deadline, please ask me for one. Of course, you can consult with me by office hours or also through appointment. And for papers, the section that I have in the syllabus will be the information that you will need when you're actually constructing the paper in terms of the style formatting of the paper, that it should be typed, double spaced, have 1-inch borders. I hope this sounds familiar from previous English classes. Your pages should be numbered and include a cover page, which is a separate sheet of paper before, or a separate screen, if you will, for in your case, that basically lists the paper title, which means your paper has to have a title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. And again, we'll review these things as we get a little bit closer to writing a paper. I always suggest that you keep a copy of any paper or anything that's important, because you never know when you might need a copy. And paper assignments I will distribute throughout the term. And as I indicated, you have the option to revise the first paper. And the original graded paper should be submitted with the revision. And you should reach out to me if you're thinking about doing a revision. I'm going to skip the sections in the syllabus right now for plagiarism and artificial intelligence, and we can talk about those next class, and go to grading. And 25% of your grade is participation. It's a big amount. 25% is responding to the discussion form. 25% is paper number 1, which you have the opportunity to rewrite for a higher grade. So already that's 50% of your grade. 25% is paper number 2, where basically you get to duplicate much of what you did with paper number 1 with a different text. And lastly, 25% is the final exam, which is basically a review of everything we've done over the course of the semester. For an A, excellent, a B, good, a C, satisfactory. And yes, there are letters after C for evaluation, but I prefer to focus on the first 3, especially on the beginning of the semester. And in the syllabus, I also have criteria for essay evaluation, which I'm not going to discuss right now. We can talk a little bit more about this as we talk about writing papers. What I wanted to draw your attention to now is a document that's entitled Course Outline, which again you can find in the syllabus and other documents folder. And again, I suggest that you take a hard copy of it so that it's easily accessible. And I've got the hard copy here right in front of me. And basically what I've got on the course outline are your assignments and due dates. And with a couple of caveats that dates and assignments may be subject to change. You never know how a snow day might change something. And you should do the readings before the dates indicated, because these are the dates in which I plan on talking about these particular elements. But let me review. Week 1. So if you're looking at week 1, you'll see that because I redid our course outline on the 26th Monday, because we would normally have a video on a Monday or a Wednesday. We had a snow day, so there was no class, which means that the video for this Wednesday, which would be the 28th, and I'm well aware that you might be watching this before Wednesday, but this is supposed to be our Wednesday video, is our introduction. So basically, I'm just reviewing the class and its components. So, week 2. So, on Monday, the 2nd, by 8 a.m., you'll have a video from me talking a little bit about Shakespeare's biography and stage. And I might have a few links for you to look at, but you will not have had to have done any reading for that particular class. But you will have had to have done reading for the 4th, that ideally before February 4th, you would have already read the Shakespeare sonnets number 15, 18, 20, 127, 130, 151. And you can find that in The Complete Pelican. I will also give you links next class where you can find that online. Shakespeare's sonnets are his shorter poems, so we'll spend some time talking about them. In fact, we've got 2 classes devoted to talking about the sonnets. Now, because we're talking about plays are rather lengthy, they're rather complex. We've got multiple classes devoted to discussing each of the plays. What would be ideal, although I realize that the world is not always ideal, is that what you would do is have the play read in its entirety at the beginning of the section in which we are discussing that play. So, as we're talking about it over the next several classes, you are actually getting ahead by reading the next play that's coming up. So that ultimately, whenever we're talking about a play, you would have read it in its entirety. That's what's ideal. I know sometimes the world is not ideal. You're not necessarily able to do that. Our first play is going to be A Midsummer Night's Dream, and many of you might have some familiarity with that play. One of the things we'll talk about is that each time you read a Shakespearean drama, you can find something new. So don't think that if you've read it before or you've seen a performance, you're done. Want to reread it, you need to reread it, and you'd be surprised at how much you can find. But this is also an introductory class, so I realize that you may have no experience with reading any Shakespearean plays. And obviously, your first reading will be the most difficult reading because you're trying to sort out plot. And of course, each time you read it, you're able to find some of the nuances about language and about theme and some of the literary elements. But we've got multiple classes devoted to A Midsummer Night's Dream so that we can talk about the play and also watch a performance. There are many performances of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm just going to select one to give you an idea of how A Midsummer Night's Dream could be performed. So basically, we will be talking about the sonnets on February 4th and February 9th, according to our course outline. On February 16th is President's Day, so there wouldn't be a video posted. On February 18th, 23rd, 25th, all of those classes are devoted to either watching a performance of or discussing the play A Midsummer Night's Dream. And then when we get to March 2nd, we move to our next play, which is Much Ado About Nothing. And in a very similar fashion, we've got basically 4 classes devoted to Much Ado About Nothing. So once again, we can watch a performance, talk about performance, but also we can talk about the play itself. And notice that up until this point, even though you've got a discussion forum response at the ending of each of these classes, you don't have any large assignments due until we finish with Much Ado About Nothing. When we finish with Much Ado About Nothing, you will have 2 plays that you will have the option of writing about: Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing. Or perhaps you might want to write about the sonnets, and that also is a possibility, which we will discuss. So basically, what we will see is that on the 16th of March, we have a spring break. So right after we're done with our comedies, we've got a week off. Now, I've got your first paper due, which is going to be based on the comedies, by ideally the 23rd of March, which is the first class after spring break. Now, if you've taken other classes with me, you know I have rolling deadlines, which means that you can hand in a paper after that date, and ideally, you would hand in a paper before that date. So very soon, we're going to be talking about papers, and you will basically have a good amount of opportunity as to when to hand in that particular paper. But obviously, the sooner you get it in, the better off everybody is. I chose the 23rd as a quote due date, unquote, even though I've got rolling deadlines and we'll accept it after that, because that's about midway through the semester, a little bit past midway, so that if you haven't handed in a paper by that point, I'm beginning to get a little bit concerned because you want to have that particular feedback. So certainly for those of you who don't want to be writing a paper over spring break, think about the idea of having your paper done before spring break so that you wouldn't have to hand it in by the 23rd or after. Week 9 is the 23rd, and this is when we move to our history plays. The history play is Richard II that we will be reading. And again, we've got multiple classes devoted to Richard II. And then we've got in week 11, so basically on the 23rd of March, the 25th, the 30th, and also the 2nd of April, we would be discussing Richard II. And week 11th, which would be about April 6th, is when we talk about Macbeth, very famous Shakespearean play. Again, we've got multiple classes devoted to Macbeth. And that is the 6th of April, the 8th of April, the 13th of April, the 15th of April. The 20th of April, a Monday, is Patriots' Day, so no classes on that day. The 22nd of April is when we move to our last tragedy, and that's Othello. And again, we've got multiple classes devoted to Othello. And I know it'll be the ending of the semester. Things will be a little bit rushed. So I have one last play that I have listed as an extra credit. You do not necessarily have to read it, but there will be an opportunity for you to write about it on the final exam if you so wanted to. And that play is known as a tragic comedy. It has the elements of both tragedy and comedy, and it's called The Tempest. We've got a couple of classes devoted to that, the 6th of May, the 11th of May. And then on the 13th of May is when I will be posting our final examination. And you will have 24 hours in which to respond to that final and return it to me. If we were in a face-to-face class, you'd have a couple of hours. But again, since this is an online class, you'd have 24 hours. And the 13th of May, our very last class, that would be the very last day you could hand in paper number 2, which would be either about the history play, which is Richard II, or would be about the tragedy, or one of the tragedies, Othello or Macbeth. And you do have the possibility of writing about The Tempest if you'd like to, but The Tempest is a play that we're not necessarily going to be spending as much time with. And again, I encourage early papers, but the very last day that you can hand in anything would be the 13th of May. And I've got 3 quotes here that I think pretty much summarize Shakespeare very nicely that we'll talk about. The first is by Gary Taylor, where he says, Shakespeare's works have become our secular Bible. The second, by Roger Pringle, is Shakespeare's popularity is due to his extraordinary facility for language, his memorable characters, and his wonderful stories. And the third quote by Alexander Anixt, don't ask for simple answers from Shakespeare. Just believe in his ability to put into one play a whole world with all of its contradictions, contrasts, and problems. So what's left for today is the discussion forum response. And I'm just going to have you introduce yourself. So feel free to upload audio or video, but you're not required to. You can see in the notes below that you are being directed to introduce yourself to the class. And you would have 48 hours to do a discussion forum response. So we'll just assume that this is our Wednesday class, which means that discussion forum would be due on Friday. And again, if you needed an extension, you would let me know. So at this point, note that also you don't need to start a new thread for your discussion forum. You can all write on the same thread. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And we will continue on next class talking a little bit about who Shakespeare was and what was going on during his time period. Take care. Bye-bye.